The film begins with a helicopter patrolling the skies, communicating with officers on boats given the clearance to inspect an approaching vessel. Observing this, Andy promptly wakes up his friend Walter, urgently instructing him to grab the necessary items. Andy seizes a duffel bag containing drugs and tosses it overboard as the police close in. Meanwhile, in New Orleans, Chris Farraday is attending a wedding for his friend Danny. As the wedding progresses, we are introduced to Chris's wife, Kate, and his friend Sebastian. Conversations delve into Chris's past as the top smuggler in New Orleans. During the festivities, a man named Church approaches Chris, inquiring about his current life and work. Chris reveals he now owns a company installing security alarms, seeking a peaceful existence. It becomes evident that Chris's father was involved in the same smuggling operations, with Church offering Chris a re-entry ticket into that world. The scene shifts to Andy and Walter driving through the night to report to their boss about losing the drugs, realizing that fleeing would only worsen their situation. Their boss, Tim Briggs, listens to their account and, instead of a confrontation, unexpectedly rams his vehicle into Andy's. Later, Kate receives a distressing call about her brother Andy's predicament, prompting Chris, Kate, and Sebastian to rush to the hospital. Andy discloses the lost drugs to Chris, who decides to seek answers. Chris instructs Sebastian to gather information about Tim Briggs, and as they head home, Chris discusses his plan to handle Andy's problem. Eventually, Chris confronts Briggs, attempting to negotiate and prevent harm to Andy. However, Briggs demands $700,000, the value of the lost drugs, and gives Chris a 2-week deadline. Frustrated, Chris decides to pay the debt, but makes it clear that Briggs must not threaten his family. After a confrontation, Chris witnesses Briggs's daughter witnessing the encounter. Subsequently, Chris realizes he must return to smuggling to resolve the situation. Despite his father's disapproval, Chris decides to re-enter the smuggling game. His father reluctantly provides information on a cargo ship route he used for smuggling. However, Chris refuses to smuggle drugs and opts for a riskier plan, buying $15 million in counterfeit U.S. currency in Panama and smuggling it into the U.S. Chris meets with the crew to execute this plan, ensuring the cargo ship carries duffel bags filled with fake currency. The captain, known as Camp, notices Chris and instructs his men to allow him aboard the ship. However, Camp immediately demotes Chris and orders his men to keep a close eye on him. After a brief power nap, Chris resumes cleaning rugs but seizes the opportunity to discreetly pilfer a map from a drawer. With the stolen map, he acquires a welder and begins using it on a wall. Eventually, he reunites with his crew to organize the smuggling of money. Chris instructs them not to involve the captain and leads them downstairs to reveal a large hole he created in the wall for hiding the cash. The second-in-command interrupts them, prompting them to leave Andy behind and seal the entrance. The crew pretends to disperse as the second-in-command checks the workshop, finding nothing suspicious. Chris shares the plan with the crew, intending to drive, retrieve the cash, and return to the ship during rush hour. Tariq expresses skepticism about the time constraints, and Olaf is tasked with creating a minor issue with the ship to stall and buy them time. Meanwhile, back at Chris's home, Briggs and his thugs monitor his family, launching a destructive assault on the house. In the midst of the chaos, a stray bullet accidentally discharges, prompting Briggs to order his men to depart. As the ship approaches the Panama Canal, Chris sabotages it, receiving a distressing call from his wife. Advising her to contact Sebastian, Chris heads to the deck and answers the phone. The captain, alarmed by the ship's excessive speed, orders the anchors to be opened to prevent a collision at the dock. However, Chris's crew unintentionally sabotages the boat too much, and it hurtles toward the dock at full speed. The captain, furious, accuses someone of tampering with the ship and storms off. While the ship undergoes a minor crash, Chris rushes to the hidden duffel bags. The captain faces reprimand for his reckless actions. Chris, Danny, and Andy swiftly navigate through the city, ensuring the safety of Chris's wife and kids. Arriving at their destination, they enter a shop to meet Edwin. Chris questions Edwin about the cash van, examines the uncut counterfeit dollars, and realizes there's an issue. He conducts a chemical test, revealing that the money was not printed on starch-free paper, leading to a heated confrontation with Edwin. Chris expresses his dissatisfaction, insisting that he wanted the situation to replicate their previous operation. He directs his team to head to the warehouse where they initially created the counterfeit money. Despite Edwin's warning, Chris proceeds toward the warehouse, but complications arise as the captain searches for him on the boat. At Briggs's house, Sebastian arrives and warns Briggs not to harm Chris's family, suggesting that hiring a more competent smuggler would have ensured the safe delivery of the package. However, it becomes apparent that Sebastian is two-faced. The scene transitions to the trio, anxiously anticipating a meeting with Gonzalo. Chris assures them that he will handle the situation. Upon arriving at the factory, Chris and Danny leave the car, leaving Andy listening to a voicemail from Briggs instructing him to call. Inside, Chris and Danny meet Gonzalo, and Chris is cordially greeted by his old friend. Meanwhile, Andy answers Briggs's call, learning that his sister and her children's safety depends on delivering the real money to a specific address in Panama. Andy opens the bag containing the real money. As Chris and Danny engage with Gonzalo, Gonzalo proposes a plan to rob an armored truck, inviting Chris to join. Outside, Danny notices Andy's absence. Gonzalo informs Chris that he can have the supernotes for free if he participates. Danny brings the van inside and reveals that both the money and Andy are missing. Gonzalo and his men point their guns at Chris, accusing him of disrespect. Chris asks if the offer for the supernotes still stands, prompting Gonzalo to take their wallets and IDs. Back at the ship, the captain instructs Olaf to prepare the boat within 10 minutes. Chris receives this information and directs Olaf to stall as much as possible. The duo, along with the van, is tasked with blocking the armored truck. When the truck approaches, they intercept it, but it flips over. Gonzalo's men attack the truck, killing the guards. Gonzalo instructs the crew to unload the items, while Tariq attempts to delay the process by paying off individuals. A shootout ensues when the police arrive, leading to heavy reinforcements. Gonzalo attempts to resist, but faces overwhelming odds. Chris and Danny join Gonzalo on the back of the truck. A chase unfolds until a bus obstructs the cops' path. Meanwhile, Andy returns to the boat, and Tariq informs Captain Camp about the situation. Chris, Danny, and Gonzalo manage to evade the cops, with Chris tossing the stolen painting into his van. They retrieve their IDs, and Gonzalo requests to be taken to the hospital. As they speed away, Gonzalo succumbs to his injuries. Danny disposes of Gonzalo, and Tariq is contacted by Captain Camp, who instructs him to come on board. Chris, attempting to hide from the authorities, engages in parkour and successfully escapes. At the same time, Customs requests Captain Camp to inspect late containers. Tariq and Danny unload the supernotes into the hidden compartment Chris created. Chris, witnessing Captain Camp, employs parkour to evade capture. Captain Camp inspects the late containers but finds nothing suspicious. Chris returns to the room and confronts Andy, violently demanding to know the whereabouts of his money. Learning that Andy used the money to buy drugs, Chris angrily throws the drugs at him until he shows the voicemail with Briggs's threat. Chris unwinds and contacts Kate to ensure everything is fine. Sebastian observes this, witnessing Chris concealing the drugs with the supernotes. Chris then calls Sebastian, updating him on the situation and mentioning the disposal of the drugs in the sea. Sebastian receives an intimidating visit from Church, who issues threats and gives him a brief timeline. After a stern lecture, Sebastian heads to Briggs, advising him to threaten Kate so that Chris doesn't discard the package. Next, the scene transitions to Kate completing her work for the day. The erratic Briggs crashes through glass doors, forcefully grabbing Kate and slamming her head into the glass. He threatens her to ensure her husband brings his package. Sebastian arrives, interacts with Briggs, feigning unfamiliarity, and drives off. Sebastian embraces Kate, but she detects alcohol on him, leading her to get angry. She instructs her kids to leave Sebastian's car, places them in her vehicle, and departs. She immediately calls Chris, and when she mentions Briggs advising against dumping the package in the water, Chris senses something amiss, and the call cuts off. Kate, now with her concerned friend, is informed that the police want to talk to her. She returns to Sebastian's house. Meanwhile, Chris learns from Andy that he acquired the drugs from someone named Ruben, a person Chris is familiar with. At Sebastian's house, Kate enters, finds him asleep, packs her belongings, and attempts to leave. Sebastian wakes up, urges her to stay the night, and when she refuses and slaps him, chases her. She locks herself in a room, calls Chris, and Sebastian forcefully opens the door, causing Kate to fall and hit her head. Chris calls back, realizing Sebastian's mistake. Chris contacts Sebastian, warning him that stepping near his family would be fatal. Sebastian informs Captain Camp that Chris is planning to dump a package. The captain agrees to prevent it, offering Chris's share of profits, but warns of calling in authorities if the package's location isn't disclosed. The captain searches Chris's room, leading Chris to sneak into the captain's quarters, stealing keys. Customs and Border Protection are alerted, deploying numerous units to search the ship. Sebastian wraps Kate's seemingly lifeless body in plastic, and the police board the ship. During interrogation, Customs informs Chris that the man with the van has been dead for years. Briggs spots Andy, who tries to escape but gets cornered. Customs releases Chris, and he sees Briggs holding Andy captive. A confrontation ensues, with Chris taking control and directing Briggs to the package. Using a created key, Chris opens a house with a silent security alarm, prompting police to head there. Chris hands Briggs the drugs, demonstrating his smuggling expertise. Chris escapes, and Captain Camp discovers Briggs and his men in his house, resulting in their arrest. Chris arrives home, calls for Kate, but she's not there. Sebastian, with Kate's seemingly dead body, plans to dump it. Chris arrives, attempting to break in, discovering a broken lock. Sebastian heads to a work site to hide the body in concrete while Chris follows. Kate, seemingly lifeless, is found near concrete being poured. Chris breaks her free, realizing she's unconscious, not dead. Tariq and Danny proceed to a location, and Chris reunites with his wife. Tariq and Danny retrieve the super notes, understanding Chris's expertise. Sebastian is imprisoned, coincidentally with the van being auctioned. Andy buys the van, and the crew sells their findings to Church for $3 million. Church questions Chris about the stolen painting in Panama. As the crew drives off in the van Andy purchased, the movie concludes with Kate and Chris at a beach house, indicating an elevated lifestyle. Thanks for sticking with us this far. Please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more recaps like this.